Okay, so let's get right into it. This week, we're looking at what's happening in England's schools. And honestly, it's a story of a massive, ambitious vision clashing head on with some pretty tough realities on the ground. And right at the heart of all this is a huge decision. The government has just responded to this sweeping review of the entire curriculum, and what they've decided sets a really bold new direction that's going to affect basically every school in the country. But here's the catch. This huge ambition is already running into a major roadblock. While these big plans are being made, 2/3 of state special schools are already over capacity. I mean, that's a massive warning sign that the system is already stretched to its absolute limit. So let's start with the blueprint itself, right? This all comes from the government's official response to that big curriculum and assessment review, and it's pointing towards some of the biggest changes we've seen in a long, long time.
So you're probably asking, what's really changing here? Well, the government's given the green light to some major recommendations, and these are going to fundamentally reshape what's taught, how we measure a student's progress, and, what skills we actually decide are important in education today.
And the scale of this shift, it's pretty significant. For starters, the controversial English Baccalaureate, or EBacc, that performance measure that kind of pushed students towards a very specific set of academic subjects, that's being scrapped. So what's in? A new focus on oracy, which is basically teaching speaking and listening skills in a structured way. There's also a new promise that any student who wants to study all three sciences separately at GCSE can do so. And a major reform of Progress 8, which is the main way we judge a school's performance. It's a whole new playbook. Which brings us to the million-dollar question. Can a system that's already under so much pressure actually pull off these huge reforms? And look, this isn't just me wondering. The Institute for Government, a really respected think tank, has put out a pretty stark warning after they looked at the government's plans versus, what's actually happening in schools. Their report points out some massive systemic failures. The pledge for thousands of new teachers? Probably not going to happen, which puts that promise of triple science for all in some serious doubt. They called the government's approach to the crisis in special needs education disjointed. And all this is under insane budget pressure, made even weirder by this paradox. You've got thousands of empty primary school classrooms tying up money, while schools for kids with special needs are absolutely bursting at the seams. And all these pressures, they have a very real impact on kids. Just look at this. School suspensions are now 10 times more common for students from the most deprived areas compared to the least. It's a really powerful sign that the disadvantage gap, the very thing these reforms are supposed to fix, might actually be getting worse. Okay, so let's shift gears and look at the inspectors. How is the school inspection system, Ofsted, adapting to all this? Because they've just launched a new framework, partly because of these exact pressures. And the feedback from schools that have tried out this new framework, it's a real mixed bag. On the one hand, school leaders are happy. They like the move away from those super intense deep dives into subjects, and they say the tone feels more professional, more collaborative. But on the other hand, there are still major worries about just more workload, the logistical nightmare for smaller schools, and the overall hit to staff well-being. But here's a crucial point. It does seem like Ofsted is listening, at least on some things. This might look like a tiny change, just adding the word typically to a grading rule, but it's actually a big deal. It gives inspectors more wiggle room when they're looking at schools with really small year groups or missing data, which is something leaders have been asking for. Because behind all the policies and the frameworks and the data, we have to remember there is a real human cost to all this pressure. And that cost lands squarely on the shoulders of the children. This number is just staggering. An absence rate of over 13% in special schools. Think about what that actually means. Our most vulnerable learners, the ones with official plans for their complex needs, are on average missing a full day of school every single week. And these challenges go beyond the classroom. They affect physical health too. More than 1 in 5 kids are now leaving primary school living with obesity. And for the little ones just starting school, obesity levels are the highest they've been since records started back in 2006, if you don't count the pandemic years. And we can't forget the profound challenges so many children face before they even get to the school gates. New data from the Office for National Statistics estimates that nearly 1 in 3 women experienced some kind of abuse during their childhood. This is the reality. This is the context our schools are working in every day. So when you start putting all these different pieces together, the big policy dreams, the lack of resources, the very real human cost, you get a picture of a system that's just
straining at its very foundations.
And this really shows the disconnect between the policymakers and the people on the ground. When you have an idea, like creating league tables for special educational needs, and 3/4 of head teachers say it won't work, it really suggests the people at the top and the people on the front line are looking at two completely different problems.
All this pressure is also changing the very shape of the school system itself. There's this big push for all schools to join large, centrally managed groups called multi-academy trusts, and it's speeding up. In fact, standalone schools are now being absorbed into these bigger trusts at a rate of 1 every 5 days. So it all leaves us with this one critical question. On one side, you've got this bold, ambitious vision for a world-class curriculum. And on the other, you've got a system grappling with teacher shortages, a full-blown crisis in special needs support, and some deep-seated student well-being challenges. How these two things end up reconciling? Well, that's what's going to define the future for an entire generation of children in England.